Hi, everyone. I am Todd Kenreck, and I am joined today by Keith Baker, who literally created the world of Eberron, and he's got a brand new book out. How are you doing over there in Portland?
I'm doing pretty good, all things
Yeah,
considered. I mean, the world falling apart in various different ways, but the D&D world is doing great.
yeah. That's why we create other worlds in our brains. So the new book is exploring Eberron.
Mhm.
How does one explore Eberron? How do you flesh out the world that you created so long ago? And this is going to be
Well,
on DM's Guild, right? Very soon.
yes, it's DM's Guild. It would have been awesome if we could have said, and it's there right now, but I'm afraid to say it's still going to be a couple of more days. I do hope it will be up by the end of the week. So almost there. It's going to be print on demand and PDF, and it's the print on demand that has slowed things down,
Mhm.
just getting everything right. But in terms of how, part of it is ever since, Eberron is about 15 years old now, and ever since starting working on it, part of the issue of it is it's a big world, and there's pieces of it that we've never had a chance to explore.
Mhm.
Some of them quite big. Like one of the things is when we made the world, we decided that it would have an entirely new planar cosmology that was distinct from the Great Wheel and was a totally different sort of arrangement of things and approach to a lot of the outsiders. And the problem is we have never really dug into that. Uh, and what happens is, unless you got something like a Plains of Eberron source book, which we didn't, when it came out in fourth and even in fifth, you had to cover the sort of basic foundation of the world in the new setting, new systems. And so there are these parts of it that, like I said, we've never gotten to. So with exploring Eberron, it's my chance to finally dig into all these things I never got to deal with. So the plains, one of the oceans, some of the monster kingdoms, things like that that I think are really interesting, but that just never actually made it into one of the major official books.
Yeah, how do you explore that? Like, do you explore why the cosmology is so different than say the Great Wheel, and they even use the tree a few times as
Mhm, mhm.
well? Like why is Eberron separated?
So part of the idea was in the beginning, when we said, okay, let's have a different cosmology, it was because we wanted the planes to be integrated with the world, to
Mm,
feel like a part of it. And first off, Eberron has its own creation myth with the three progenitor dragons. Eberron is theoretically the dragon between. Um, and the progenitors created the planes, and part of the idea is each plane in the Great Wheel originally, planes reflected alignments.
mhm.
This is the lawful good plane, this is the lawful evil plane. With Eberron, we wanted the planes to reflect more sort of primal concepts. Life, death, war, peace, life, well, I said life, death, light and darkness. And the idea is that Eberron, or the material plane, is where all these concepts converge. This is the world where we have war and peace, life and death, but that each of the planes is this sort of pure Platonic ideal, if you will, of a particular concept. And that was a great idea and it was really interesting. But like I said, then we only had throughout multiple source books about a paragraph on each plane, which didn't really give you enough to actually go on an adventure there or to understand how Fernia wasn't just the elemental plane of fire. And with exploring Eberron, there's a whole chapter on the planes. Each plane gets about 4 to 6 pages. And part of what I wanted to do was not only dig into those concepts, how is Fernia not just the elemental plane of fire, to give you enough that you could run an adventure there, but also to talk about how the planes can affect an adventure even if you don't go there. Because that was always another part of the idea of Eberron is you have what are called manifest zones, which are places in the world where planar energies leak into the world and have effects. in Sharn, in particular, the city of towers. The idea for why, how they can have these incredibly high towers there that you don't see all over the world is because it's in a manifest zone tied to the plane of Serenia that supports magics of flight and levitation, that the towers are actually suspended through the magic of this manifest zone. And so that also has been this idea that manifest zones are these sort of supernatural resources that are very important to the foundations of cities and cultures. But again, without a lot of knowledge about the planes and what are the effects of a manifest zone to Shavarath, you can't really do much with that. So that's one in particular that I've wanted to write more about the planes for over a decade. And so actually really getting a chance to talk about that, is something I'm very excited.
You've got a lot of not only, I mean, it definitely goes very, very in depth into the world of Eberron, but you have a lot of crunch here as well. There are magical items, there
Yeah, yeah.
are monsters, and there are subclasses. Can you
Mhm.
run me through the subclasses that are included in
Uh,
this particular book?
Certainly, I'll see how many I get off the top of my head, and then I will check to see if I missed any. First off, one of the things that the book incorporates is there's a big section on the Dakani goblinoids, the Dar. And this is the idea in Eberron that long before humanity, basically, Corvair is the sort of default, this is where adventurers begin on the continent of Corvair. But the idea is that long before humanity came to Corvair, it was primarily the home of the orcs and the goblins. And that the goblins had an empire that lasted for thousands of years, that was a very advanced civilization, in some ways more advanced than modern civilization, that was destroyed by the beings known as the Dalkir. And so when humanity came, the Khani had long fallen, but that there are these small, essentially vaults, if you will, where the Dakani have survived, and now they are coming back and basically saying, "This world's a mess. We need to fix it." So two of the subclasses we have are specifically tied to the Dakani. We have the Dashor, which are the Forge Adepts, which is basically the Dakani tradition of artifice. And part of the idea, this is sort of a spin on the battlesmith, but
Mhm.
instead of being driven by the construct, by having a companion, it's more driven about basically, I am making a perfect weapon and I am enhancing it. But it is that idea that the Dakani were primarily about uh, forging weapons and armor. And so it is an expert in weapons and armor who then also essentially creates the Kalshrat, I think it's called, their sort of perfect weapon. So they're another melee driven artificer.
Mhm.
And then we have the College of the Dirge Singer, the Gashkala, Durkala, excuse me, and that is the Goblin Bard tradition. Because one of the things we've said with the Dakani is they weren't really big on arcane magic or on clerics. Their spiritual leaders are primarily bards.
Mhm.
So the Durkala, part of the idea there is it's playing off of the inspiration, and it's a little bit of the sort of warlord approach.
Mhm.
It's very much about I'm sort of acting through my companions. I don't need to fight. I am directing others. So those are two. We also have a second uh, artificer class, which is called the Maverick.
Right.
And this very much plays off the idea. One of my favorite things about the original 3.5 Artificer was an infusion called Spell Storing Item. And Spell Storing Item, there were two things they could do. Spell Storing Item basically would let you infuse any item. You could turn it into a wand, essentially, of any spell of first to third level. A one shot, I can say, I've got to heal someone. I'm going to make this box into a cure disease,
Mhm.
one shot. And you see this a lot in my novels, where there is an artificer named Lei, and she's constantly like, "Give me a moment, I'll make the thing we need to solve the problem." And while there is spell storing item in the current artificer, it doesn't have that same level of I can put together the thing we need here. And
Mhm.
so what I wanted with the Maverick was a little more sense of that versatility of being an inventor, of I'm going to make the thing we need right for the moment. And so the Maverick basically picks other classes that it gets to draw on their spell list to a limited degree. You have what's called a breakthrough spell slot. And as you rise in level, you get to pick more. So as you get further along, you get to say, well, I could have a cleric spell or I could have a wizard spell, whatever fits the current situation. And one of their other things on that line is they also get to change out their cantrips,
Mm-hmm.
which is again a little thing, but it's that idea of give me a short rest. If we
Mm-hmm.
really need X, give me a short rest and I'll throw that together. I don't feel it's an overly powerful class. It depends how you look at it, but I've been playing one right now, and it's just that sense of I like the feel of being a tinkerer, of give me a moment and I can make this thing that fits. So those are the two artificer classes. We have the bard, the monk. We have a class called the living weapon. And the living weapon kind of combines a couple of old prestige classes from third edition. It picks up the idea of the quarry nightmare, which was a Kalishtar path that you sort of created a nightmare shroud of your quarry around you. But then it also plays a little with the were-touched master. And it's basically saying, let's look at characters who are sort of turning their bodies into weapons. And within the class, it plays with a couple different concepts. You have that sort of psychic path of the Nightmare Shroud. You have a path that's geared more towards Warforged, though again, anybody can take these, but that's more about being solid, heavy, strong. The more shifter oriented, I'm growing claws, things like that. And then one that was sort of inspired with the idea of a changeling, being able to literally make their body into crazy weapons, poison, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't have a new warlock class, but we do have
How dare you, sir?
a
You haven't.
subrace, the runeborn dwarves, who are actually sort of geared towards being warlocks.
Mm.
And so Rusty here, who I'm trying to show, is in fact a runebound warlock. And basically this ties to in uh, the Rising from the Last War, we basically added this twist to the Moror Dwarves, where we said, oh, they are actively fighting against the Dalkir, and they are actively incorporating symbionts, living tools and weapons, into their lives. So first off, you mentioned magic items. There's a whole bunch of new symbionts that tie to that. And second, the Runebound Dwarves they're sort of a twist on the, I think it was called the Dalkir Half-Blood from 3.5. This is a
Mm.
specifically dwarven path, but it's the idea of someone who is born with an inborn symbiont and with a sort of greater ability to use them.
Oh man.
And so basically with Rusty here, you can see if you look that he has his little friend coming out of his shoulder there.
Yeah.
Also, everyone says, well, why is a dwarf wearing sunglasses, especially in a dungeon? They aren't sunglasses. It's because you don't want to see what he's got under them.
Oh boy.
Because that's the thing.
That's wonderfully disgusting. I love it.
Okay, so talking about
You got the
classes.
Druid Circle of the Forged, which is kind of a
Yes.
huge deal.
So this image that has been called out is actually a player character I played. One of my player characters, whose name
It's
was
so good.
Rose,
It's
who
such.
was a Warforged Druid. And part of it is that ever since the very beginning, there has been this basic question of, does a Warforged Druid turn into a flesh and blood animal or turn into a Warforged animal? And the official ruling has always been flesh and blood. But as a Transformers fan, I always wanted Ravage or Laserbeak. I wanted to be a Warforged animal. And so this is where we added the Circle of the Forge, which is you get to turn into you wild shape into construct forms.
Yeah.
So it's sort of a spin on the Circle of the Moon in that it is driven, it's a wild shape driven druid, but it is different because it is focused on being a construct animal and your sort of durability and things like that. So it's distinct in that way. Beyond that, we talked about the
Because
dirge
you've got things
suit.
like adamantine hide, you've got like skin of steel, elemental fury. Yeah,
Yep,
it's
yep. Getting to sort of add, fire or acid to your
yeah,
things, and just generally about sort of durability. And
right.
it was something that I discussed with Jeremy Crawford when we were working on Rising. And part of the thought there was, well, maybe we would make construct beasts
Hmm.
that would be, oh, any druid, this is just you turn into this. Since that didn't
Yeah.
happen, as I said, I always wanted, as I said, I just wanted that approach. Then the living weapon, and then the one other one is the mind domain for the cleric, which was very much the original, sort of inspiration, was uh, because we have Kalistar, we don't have
Right.
psionics yet. And it was essentially just sort of saying, well, you can play, Kalistar make good clerics.
Yeah.
And so it was wanting to say this is a cleric that has a certain degree of psionic flavor.
Hmm.
And so, you get spells that can be easily flavored as, command is a great one that, sure, technically you're saying this is happening, but I could just be, using my psychic whammy on you. Confusion, dominate person, telekinesis. Um, and one of the little things that's just a little detail, but when you cast a cleric spell or cantrip that inflicts radiant damage, you can choose to have it inflict psychic damage.
Mm,
And often radiant damage is a handy damage type to have access to. But this is
yeah.
just saying, if for some reason you rather, you can cast your sacred flame, but because you're dealing psychic damage, it's easier to say, oh, I'm totally blasting him with my mind. So it's all about the flavor. Um, and so those are the main subclasses. Again, it's a variety. It's all sort of tied into the different things. Having the we do talk about the Warforged. We do talk about changelings, shifters, Kalistar, and so it's sort of adding a couple little options that aren't limited to them.
Hmm.
Anybody can be a mind cleric, but it is a particularly good domain for a Kalistar.
Do you expand on dragon marks in any way?
Yes, we expand on them in a big way,
Okay.
which is Sybaris dragon marks. And basically, in the original 3.5 model, you had dragon marks as feats, and you had the least, the lesser, and the greater feats, and then a prestige class that was the Sybaris mark, that was this big, powerful mark that you could have even if you didn't have a lesser mark. Fifth edition doesn't really do feat chains. It's not sort of part of the design. And so with Rising, we chose to do this idea of first off, dragon marks being part of subrace.
Hmm.
And second, part of what we said with that is instead of having this strict least, lesser, greater, part of what we said is you can just sort of flavor that class abilities are coming from your dragon mark.
Hmm.
That even as a rogue, oh, my evasion is actually my cloak of shadows from my dragon mark, however you want to call it. But you can say your dragon mark's getting more powerful. It's just, it doesn't have that hard coded aspect to it.
Right.
So, first off, one thing that has always been a part of things is the idea that a lot of the power of the dragon mark houses comes from uh, focus items. The fact that they have made these tools that only people with dragon marks can use. And so, what gives House Lyrandar control over air travel is only Lyrandar heirs can pilot an airship. And so, we've added a whole section of new focus items and gone into that in more detail and created a lot more options, much like we have more symbionts. But then we have also added Sybaris marks. And how we chose to go with that, rather than making them feats, part of it was saying that a Sybaris mark is supposed to be a remarkable, unexpected thing that really is about story. Developing a Sybaris mark should sort of change your character's life. And what we decided to do is to make them supernatural gifts. And of course, the funny thing is now Theros has come out with supernatural gifts, it's like suddenly a concrete thing. At the time, one of the reasons for doing it was because supernatural gifts weren't used a lot. And I
Hmm.
loved the concept. And so by making Sybaris marks as supernatural gifts, part of the point of it is saying it's really up to the game master to decide when these enter the game. It's not just something like a feat that we have to then balance it against which level do you get it, how does it compare with certain things. We're saying it's a supernatural gift. If for some reason the game master wants to say, I'm going to give your third level character a Sybaris mark because that's going to drive the story, they can. But also at the same time, a game master could just say, I just don't want to deal with these.
Hmm.
And they don't appear in that case. Nonetheless, and the way we have described it now is essentially saying if you get it and you have a dragon mark, consider it a greater dragon mark. If you get it and you don't have a dragon mark, then it's a Sybaris mark. And so we sort of combined those two concepts together instead of, as had been done in Wayfinders, greater dragon marks were done as a feat. And this is just sort of saying, a simpler way to do it, since that was taken out of Rising. A simpler way to do it is just to have this one thing that is a greater dragon mark for this person and a Sybaris dragon mark for that person.
You've got, I mean, this is it's a very full book. It's like 248 pages, correct?
In word count, it is actually longer than Rising.
Okay.
It's a dense book.
And we do have some really great symbionts. Here we've got the crawling gauntlet. We've got the hungry weapon, which I adore. The coat of many eyes, which is super gross. Shadow sibling, tongue worm, wandering eye, spell
The
burrow.
tongue worm is one of my favorites,
Right.
just because it was from the very beginning, and I always like it when a bad guy, poisons you with his tongue, and you're just like,
Right, yeah.
where'd that come from? So yeah, there's some nutty stuff.
Yeah, this is the coil in the muscle terminates into a sharp barb, and when you attune to it, you can lash out at people and cause them to make a saving throw.
You basically have a scorpion tail that comes out of your mouth, and it's always fun to have as a backup as a player character, but it's a great surprise for the NPC you did not realize was working with the Cults of the Dragon below.
Yeah, and there's some really fantastic art in this book, by the way. We have a great symbiote. At page 233, there's a great piece of artwork here, which is just horrifying and makes my skin crawl. I don't have it myself.
Let me see. I'll see if I can grab it up. Is that the arm with the things coming out of it?
It's the whole woman.
Yeah.
On
Valara.
Yeah, it's so good.
All right.
But yeah, this is like a really fun addition to D&D.
So this is Valara, the Crawling Queen, and this is basically one of the other Dalkir that we have said that there's 6 big, everybody has heard of these Dalkir. And over the years, we've mainly focused on Belashira, the Lord of Eyes, who created the Beholders. We had a little bit of Orlask, the Ooze Prince, who got an article I wrote in a Dragon. And then with Rising, we doubled down on Dern the Corruptor, who created Mind Flayers, the Dolgons, the Dolgrims. And we all definitely wanted to get into more of them. So Valara deals with, needless to say, insects.
Right.
And this is another one. I will note in the foreword, they show one of my sketches. I have some sketches of my early drawing of Valara.
Yeah.
That I'll have to share at some point. Just for that. But there's various other things. I will say we brought back the Dolora Quarry, which is a quarry driven by rage, and that is one that I have never liked the art. It's appeared in other books, and it has never fit my opinion of this thing. Is supposed to be scary, and I'm very happy with the work. That was Ekaterina Yastrubetskaya. And she just did fantastic work. She did a couple of images in the book. And as I say, best one there. But I will go ahead actually and show you an image that we have not shown anywhere else. I don't think even you've seen this, which is one of my favorites, which is by Marco Bernadetti. And this is the map of the plains.
Oh, nice.
And what you can see, it's a little hard to see, but he has taken every plane and created a little distinct image for him, which we use later sort of in the
Oh
planar
yeah, yeah, yeah,
sections.
yeah.
But I'm amazed by the amount of detail he gets into there. And in particular, I will say, up until this book, I was never that big a fan of Slod.
Right.
But having worked on
That's fantastic.
the Crawling Chaos,
Yeah.
I both love now Kithri and the Slod. So yeah, certainly a number of things in writing this book. A lot of it is drawing on ideas I've had for a very long time, and yet at
Right.
the same time, things that were never completely thought out. I had basic ideas about the aquatic civilizations,
Hmm.
but when you actually sit down and write for 30 pages on them,
Right.
you think about them in a lot more depth.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things in here that I didn't think actually Kithri or Fernia were going to be that interesting, and now I can't wait to run adventures there.
That's
So
awesome.
there you are.
We've got a lot of questions from chat, so we're
Oh,
going to
great.
go ahead and dig in. Some of these we've already answered. Lord Catherine was wondering if, with Artificer out, are there any new subclasses you would like to see? Obviously,
Yep.
yes. There are several subclasses in this new book that you are free to
I
use.
Yeah, and I will say, in terms of things I'd like to see, I really liked the Archivist from Unearthed Arcana that didn't
Hmm.
end up making into Rising, but I thought that was a fun design. So
Yeah, and that
I'd like to
ultimately
see
has
that.
become the Scribe Wizard.
Mhm, mhm.
But yeah, I was a giant Archivist fan as well. Anyway, that was pretty fun to have that little floating Jarvis.
Yeah.
I am experimenting right now with the Artificer Armorer. I've played it
Yep.
before, so I'm still messing around with that.
It's certainly a fun idea, and that raises the question of I don't have Rising from the Last War on hand, but you have to ask yourself, is that a Warforged on the cover, or is it an Armorer Artificer on the cover?
Exactly. Like,
But
like I mean, and I tend towards. I have a character named Ren that I like to play with my wife, who plays an artificer gnome, and Rend is the suit of armor.
nice.
Like, and that's how I play that.
Well, I had a Warforged artificer named Smith was one of my early characters I played in third edition, and that's
Hmm.
one reason I again like that flexibility because that was his thing. But I also like the armorer, even though I wasn't involved with it, just because one of the explanations I've given for the Lord of Blades and saying who's the Lord of Blades, one of the ones I've always said is, well, it could be Aaron DeCanneth just dressed in a Warforged outfit,
Hmm.
wearing Warforged armor, and so the armor artificer lets you pursue that dream.
Yeah, I mean, like I like those weird hyper fantasy. Like I always like, Hexblade Warlocks. I always like to think I'm like, well, what if it's not uh what if what if the human portion isn't the character? What if the character is the blade? You know, I, I,
I love that as a concept. I will say I used to play a system called Fantasy Hero, the fantasy version of the hero system long ago.
mhm.
40 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, 30. Um, and I remember one of my players played a character who was essentially an organ grinder with a monkey,
Oh
but the
no, it was a
character
monkey.
was the monkey,
Yeah.
and he had the ability to just sort of conjure and control these meat
Yeah.
puppets, if you will. And it was just this summon this, essentially like one hit point commoner,
Hmm.
but the number of uses they came up with for having a disposable dude,
Yeah.
was surprisingly clever.
Yeah. I love that stuff, especially if the DM buys into that
Yep.
weirdness. Um
Anyhow, what else we got on questions?
yeah, we've got one person's asking Nob Nalen, what's your
Mhm.
favorite plane, Keith?
It is very hard because it is like people saying, well, what's your favorite nation in Corvair? With the planes in particular, having made all of them, I like all of them. It is the case that everyone I'd be like, someone's not like, oh, but I love it. So, like for example, Kithri is a great one of, it's a crawling chaos. That isn't that exciting. And now I'm like, oh, I can't wait to do some stuff with there. But if I had to pick one. So what I'm saying is I like all of them.
Hmm.
If I did have to pick one, um, I would, I really like what we've done with Zoriat. in this book. There's a bunch of interesting twists. Part of it is Zoriad is definitely the place to go to if you want to mess around with time travel.
Hmm.
So that makes an interesting place.
Which I
I
love
would,
doing.
yep. I love where Shavarath has gone, but it would probably be right down to a toss up between Dalquar, the Plane of Dreams, and Thelanis, which is the Fey realm.
Mm.
And just because both of those are ones I've used a great deal, I love exploring the potential of dreams. And I also really love playing around with the flavor and storybook logic of Fey stuff.
Yeah.
So basically, I would say, the two of those have probably always been my favorite planes. But then there's so many that have come out here that I'm just so excited to do more with, that I just really came out much more interesting than even I expected.
Yeah, I am a giant Feywild fan of anything Fey, and I always forget the name of the book, and it's also a TV series on Netflix, well, mini series, but it's
Now I'm
Doctor.
curious. Oh, Professor, not Professor, Mr.
It's Mister
It's Norrell
Noel.
and Strange, but I can't remember their
Yeah, it's like,
titles.
yeah, exactly. I feel like that he did that for very good justice to a degree,
Yes.
like the way that the Fae would like suddenly like show up and everything's creaking and groaning, and I always love that stuff. So
And
we got
mhm.
another question from Molecular. Any crunch for the Kalishtar and any crunch for psionics? Well, there are no official psionics yet, so
Right. So basically, we did not try and add a complete psionic system into this. As we said before, what we have is the mind domain for the cleric, which is very much intended as this is a way to play a Kalishtar with some psionic feel, even
mhm,
if you aren't using a full psionic system. There is some discussion in the section on Kalishtar about just ways to flavor other characters.
mhm,
You can play a warlock and say, I'm a scion, my powers are psionic, even without a full psionic system. So there's discussion of that. And there are also a couple of additional feats for Kalishtar, plus, of course, the Living Weapon Monk, incorporated. And this was the thing, is we started off saying, well, do we have the Wear Touch Master? Do we have the Quarry Nightmare? And ultimately said, you could just push these together into one archetype. And so
yeah.
that's what we did. So there's some new crunch for the Kalishtar. At the same time, they're discussed, but they're not one of the main focuses
And
of the book.
and the Mind Cleric gets an extended spell list that is all very psionic heavy, like
Right,
Dissonant
exactly.
Whispers and stuff like that. So
Yep, yep,
you are getting those spells that you would tend to expect that creepy aberrations would also have, and
right.
stuff like that. So we've got another question from Molecule. Always love the gatekeeper druidic concept. Are gatekeepers fleshed out further? Are other druidic sects given a deeper history for the reason for existing?
Mhm. No, unfortunately, they're not.
Okay.
And basically, that is the thing of even now, there are so many places I have not explored that I would like to, and those include Kabara, the Demon Wastes, the Eldine Reaches, and in particular, to me, where you're going to get the gatekeepers is in a book that deals with the Eldine Reaches and the Shadow Marches.
Hmm.
That this deals with the Circle of the Forge because it includes a section about Warforged, and the Circle of the Forge is a Warforged centered druid. I love the Eldine Druids. It is definitely something that is very near and dear to my heart. All of the different sects I find interesting, haven't gotten enough sort of attention. But again, it's basically a thing of, if I put in everything I would like to cover, the book would have been twice the length.
Right.
So basically, unfortunately, you don't get that here. I'm not going to stop writing. So I'm just saying that is certainly on my list of topics I would like to address in more detail. It just didn't make the cut here.
How long did it take for you to make this book with all these
We have
writers?
been working on this book for over a year.
Okay.
And part of that is just because it did not take me a year of nonstop writing.
Hmm.
But between the various chaoses that have happened over the last year, the
Right.
last couple months have just been the print process. I was done with it in May. Uh, it ended up just being longer than we thought to cover the concepts they did. We originally planned it to be about 160 pages, and it's about 248. So part of it was just discovering, like, originally I'm like, oh, I'll cover each plane in 2 to 3 pages. And what I
Hmm.
discovered is that just didn't do it to the depth that I wanted. Like, it wasn't worth it to do just 2 pages on each plane because you weren't really getting enough. And so it's just a longer book. And I will say, personally, I'm going to try and do a few shorter things so that it's not a year till the next thing I write.
Right.
But yeah, and we spent a lot of time developing the art. There's around 40 something unique pieces of art developed for the book,
Hmm.
that Wayne Chang, the producer, did an amazing job of art direction. Um, and so yeah, it was I think PAX East was where Wayne and I first came up with this concept, and it was, as I said, over a year ago at this point. But whatever I come up with next will be sooner than a year. I'm not going to name titles or anything like that yet, but
Right.
I have things I want to work on, and we're going to do a few smaller things so that they come out sooner.
Right. We got another question here. Is there an alternative to spells of the mark for, say, the mark of the Sentinel? I sense someone very much wants different spells for mark of the Sentinel for some reason. Uh,
No, I'm afraid we didn't change.
yeah.
I didn't change the dragon marks at all. We've added with things like the Sybaris marks, and I will say we have focus items. That
Mm,
part of the main point of the focus items are letting non-spellcasters use their spells of the mark.
mm-hmm.
And it's a little bit like having a wand that lets you use a charge of the spells from your spells in the mark list, because that was one of the complaints we've encountered is, oh, it's just not fun that I what I liked in third edition is I get to be a Fiorlin rogue and I get to cast teleport
Right.
even though I'm a rogue. And we hear that, and so we have focus items, channeling rods, things like that that do let you have that style of character, even if you're not a spellcaster.
And that certainly harkens to I would say prestige classes to a
Yeah,
degree from like
yeah.
3.0. Like the old assassin in 3.0 was one of my favorites. A prestige class gave you like darkness, silent image, silent just silence.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
was just terrifying. It was just like the most scary assassin you could possibly imagine.
yeah.
Well, perhaps a little OP, but I enjoyed playing it.
A random thing, just talking about crunch again, I will throw out is the book has symbionts, it has the Sybaris dragon marks, it has dragon mark focus items, it has Dakani magic items. One of the other things is there is a section on, in particular, the Last War,
Mm,
in which what I wanted is, we've always talked about wide magic, but we haven't really talked, even the source book, The Forge of War, talks about the history of war, but not really the methods.
mm,
And so there is a big section in chapter one that actually talks about, like, what do the weapons of war in Eberron look like. So finally, stats for things. I've talked about siege staves, the
mm-hmm.
idea that instead of a cannon, you have a staff, but it's the size of a tree trunk.
Right.
I've talked about that again. They've appeared in novels, they've done like that, but we've never had stats for them until now. So, there's a lot of sort of Eberron specific siege weaponry, and some further tools like that.
I imagine, yeah, just a giant tree wand, or also just the most dangerous caber toss of all time.
Exactly.
Um, any additional information about the Mark of Death and what its powers might be?
No, I mean, honestly, to me, the Mark of Death is one of those things that we added to the game. For anyone who doesn't know, it's the
Hmm.
idea that there was a 13th dragon mark, and that the entire bloodline that carried it was hunted down and eradicated, and that it only exists on a lich who can't use it because they're dead. And so it was always intended as, this is a mystery in the world. If you want to have the mark of death appear on someone, ooh, that would be a big shocking thing. But we intentionally, like the mystery of the morning, the whole idea was we want to leave this for the DM who adds it to their game to say, how do they want it to
Hmm.
fit their story? Do they want it to be an out of control, crazy thing, or do they want it to be pretty much just evenly matched up to the other dragon marks? What I have always said is that one of the things that we say differentiates aberrant marks and true dragon marks is that the true marks are generally constructive. They build, they create, they heal, and aberrant marks are generally destructive. And so part of me is the way I generally look at it is the mark of death should be about positive aspects of necromancy, speaking to the dead, raising, animating the dead, controlling undead. It shouldn't be this is a mark that lets me kill everybody.
Hmm.
It is a mark that lets you interact with
Hmm.
death in a positive way, if you will.
Hmm.
But that's my take.
That makes a lot of sense. And also not so it's not overpowered.
Right, exactly. But at the same time, that is part of the reason we didn't put stats to it was because if as a DM you want it to be overpowered, okay,
Yeah.
you know.
You kind of need that hint of mystery. I mean, that's what's fun. Like you and I have spoken before about the calamity. You know what the answer is in your head canon, but everyone else's answer might be different.
Well, and what I love is that when I play a game of Eberron, I don't know the answer to the morning
Hmm.
because I don't know what they've decided.
Right.
And I love that, is something I've always said about setting material. And it's very much the case with Exploring Eberron. This is a book that adds a lot of lore. One of the things I've tried to do throughout it, like in talking more about history, in talking about the planes, there's always the piece of, and how can you use this? How is
Hmm.
this relevant? Why does this matter? Um, but beyond that, it's also very concretely the point of you don't have to use this, especially this because it's unofficial, but
Hmm.
that all of this should be something that is inspiring, not
Yeah.
something that is limiting.
Right.
If you want to take something from this and just change it, change it.
Right.
Do what will make the best story for you.
Same thing with just D&D in general. I mean, D&D is
Exactly.
yours. Like
Exactly.
that's the point. If you want to destroy
And
Waterdeep, destroy
do it.
Waterdeep.
Yeah. And the morning is just a very concrete example of that.
Hmm.
Of I could give you an answer, but what I'm saying is even if I did, that shouldn't be the answer.
Right.
It should always be up to you to decide what it is in your game.
And we got another question here. Will we learn any more about Arandis Vol in the book?
I it doesn't go very deep into her. There it does talk. There is a section about the blood of Vol. So I will say that there is a section on faiths that really gets into my personal view on the
Hmm.
silver flame, the blood of Vol, and the sovereign host, because there's been a lot of conflicting sort of material written by different authors, and so this is me saying this is how I see them. The Blood of Vol in particular has been one that started off being presented one way and has slowly turned around. And I'm saying, well, here's how I saw it, from the beginning.
Hmm.
So it talks about the Blood of Vol and a little bit about Arandis's role in that. At the same time, part of the point of this book was it's not primarily geared around a lot of like secrets or individuals. It's geared more around locations. Here
Hmm.
is Droam. Here is the Roarholds. Here is the Thunder Sea. And so it's more sort of big places. I'm certainly interested. One of the things I might write at some point would be more focusing on specific individuals, Mordain the Flesh Weaver, Lady Elmero, like here are some of the Lord of Blades, take some of the big iconic characters and actually write more about them. But that is a different idea. That's not what this is.
Right. Eberron is so high. Well, high fantasy isn't necessarily the right word, but it's very high. It can be very high fantasy steampunk
Yeah.
in a way, which
I
I
call it,
adore.
I like to say it's not high magic, it's wide magic,
It's wide
because it's
magic,
that idea of magic being used in a sort of industrial capacity.
which I've always loved since I think Thief the Dark Project, which I've
Mhm,
actually been
mhm.
rewatching
Yep, yep, yep.
videos on.
Nice.
Probably my favorite video game of all time. Very much delves into that. So there's Thief 2, and then of course Dishonored is kind of like the spiritual successor. All of those are very industrial magic games. Styx is where
Mhm,
you play
mhm.
a goblin as one of
Oh,
the games.
frankly, what was it that just came out? Carnival Row. was
Yeah,
one that I
Carnival
watched,
Row.
and I said, "Oh, you could totally just drop a lot of this into Eberron."
Yeah, yeah. I actually quite enjoyed Carnival Row. Actually, just it suffered from coming out during the Dark Crystal at the same time.
Yeah, that was quite a thing.
Yeah, is there gonna be more stuff about airships or other elemental vehicles of any kind?
Um,
This is a question from chat. Oh, yeah,
mm,
not me.
yeah, 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 yeah. Um, I don't think we get into airships here. I know it's something we considered, but no, I don't think it's covered in this book.
Right, right.
I think it's a good idea. Again, I would love to do more that is just more about the just everyday magic, if you
Mm-hmm.
will. I think that's, and of course, the Explorer's Handbook. If you go back to 3.5, is available on the DM's Guild and does go into more detail about airships and has some maps and things like that. So, I mean, just if you're just looking for something immediately,
Right.
that is an option that's out there, and the mechanics don't perfectly match, but a lot of it is about the ideas. Um, I would say that's something I'd love to do sometime. It's not sort of the immediate, oh, yes, I'll be doing that in the next month. Again, there's so many
Yeah,
things
there's
I want to write about, and I don't know when I'll get to them.
are there any subclasses? This is coming from session zero clothing. Are there any subclasses you wanted to add to the book, but ultimately it just didn't pan out? It didn't quite feel right for the book.
That's a good question. I'm sure there are. It's been, again, over the course of a year, I have to stop and think back to, what did we cut?
Yeah.
Because we did certainly have to cut a lot of ideas that I loved. I might suddenly remember that sort of as we go.
Yeah.
Um,
And you
I'll
never know if you can revisit it. That's why it's a difficult question to ask someone because you may find a solution to a subclass that wasn't working.
yeah, and there's certainly a lot of interesting ideas that are just in classic Eberron, like the Bone Knight, for example.
Mm,
It's a fun idea. It just didn't have any connection to this book.
right.
There was no reason to put a Bone Knight into this book. So that's the thing, is most of the subclasses in here are in here because in some way they are tied to one of the primary subjects
Hmm.
that is in the book. So that's what I'm saying, is if I write about the Eldeen Reaches, I will definitely talk about the Druidic sects and have options for Rangers, Druids, and Barbarians
Right.
that tie to those. But without having that material about the Eldeen Reaches, then those have no context and it wouldn't fit here.
I'm actually curious because you mentioned like it took a long time to make this book. Um, we're from an era, especially like when it was second edition. Boy, everything was like a module. Like everything was
Yep.
pretty
Yep.
bite sized, and you could go to your local comic book store and probably find a new module every week. It felt like.
Mhm.
Is there something that you like about that particular cadence, like that shorter form of
Well,
having that book of
yep.
elves come out once in a while, that kind of thing?
I will say one reason that we went for the big book, aside
Yeah.
from the fact that it is uh it is bigger than I originally planned, but I will still say is just the point of, we wanted something that you can put on your shelf and hold in your hands, and that
Yeah.
feels like it's worth having this
Right.
as a print book.
Right.
Like, if it's a 30-page thing, do you need it in print?
Yeah,
Whereas
yeah,
here we
yeah.
wanted something that really felt like, as I said, at the end of the day, there's more words in this than there are in Rising.
Right.
And so we wanted something that had that weight. Having done that, as I said, I'm a little happier to focus on, some faster, shorter. Again, if you say this is 200 and 40 something pages, if I'd broken it into 8 30-page things and could have had, one of those coming out every 2 months, that would have been a sort of easier, more balanced
Mhm.
path. At the same time, again, there is something nice, it's back to with the planes. It's kind of nice to say, here they all are, as opposed to here's three of them or something like that.
Why do you think people fall in love with Eberron as a world? Like, why do you feel that it took off in the way that it has and does?
Well, I think there were a couple different aspects of it. I think part of it is that as you said, the wide magic, the using magic in an industrial capacity, and it just changes things up. It brings in some of the steampunk or cyberpunk flavor for
Hmm.
people who want that. If that's something you want to explore, it just has a different feel. But then also, I'll say when it first came out, part of the point was it did intentionally take a number of familiar things and really change the way they worked. You know, suddenly gnomes, instead of being jovial tinkers, are a nation of assassins and secret police.
Hmm.
Um, and in general, one of the things was this was a book that said, "Hey, goblins aren't inherently evil. In fact, they had a great civilization, and in fact, humans have come and kind of taken all their stuff."
Right.
Like, that's something that has obviously come up very recently. Of this is a thing where D&D in general is trying to change its direction. That was something Eberron did back in the beginning, was to say we want to change the way we look at monsters. We want to change the way we look at good and evil.
Right.
And so it did just say, let's shake up some of the, you know, things that have become very commonplace to established tropes. So
Right.
on the one hand, yes, it's that grand fantasy, but basically the point is Forgotten Realms is more, this feels like Tolkien, this feels like, the classic, what you're used to. And
Right.
Eberron was saying, but what if we drop a batch of Blade Runner into
Right.
that?
Well, and also just the reality that that question that you ask, the sci-fi asks too, is like, okay, well, what is a Goblin Empire? What is that culture? What
Right,
is the Null Empire? Like,
right.
what happens there? And like, that's why I particularly like about Eberron is like fleshing all of that out, and
And
how these little pieces have interacted all these years. That's the fun of sci-fi.
right, and part of the point of taking the goblins in particular in Eberron was to say, okay, we will keep the idea that goblins and humanity are have an uncomfortable relationship.
Right.
But we're saying that's not because goblins are evil and because humans are right.
Yeah.
We're saying actually it's because humans have kind of taken everything from the goblins and they're right to be angry.
Right.
And they aren't evil, they're angry.
Right.
And that basically, I like the fact that you can have the adventurers go into the dungeon, get to the bottom, find the awesome magic sword, be high fiving each other, and then
Right.
have the goblin show up and say, "Yo, that's literally our Excalibur. You just robbed the king's tomb and took one of our great relics.
Yeah.
What are you doing?" And that players have to sort of come to that, oh, these things don't just appear, that's someone's treasure.
Yeah.
And what
Exactly.
happens when you have to look at that. And so that's all I think is with Eberron. It also did things like the approach to the gods in Eberron. Part of the idea of it was just to say, this is a little more like our experience of
Yeah.
things, where this is about faith, where you can't go punch Thor in the face and you have to think about, why do I believe this?
Right.
Or things like that. And so mainly, as I said, it's just that it takes a lot of things that have become standard and just says, but what if we look at them in a slightly different way?
Hmm. Yeah.
So
Um,
that's what I like about it, Brian.
well, and you also, I mean, if you want to be a wand slinging cowboy, or
Exactly. And
you,
again, this is why I know I'm going to write about Kabara at some point, because one of the campaigns I've been running most recently is a wand slinging cowboy campaign in Kabara. So
tell me more about that region too. Like, how wide is it? Like, I actually, my wife has a interesting concept for like a very kind of Western, but very strange module. So I'm
So,
curious.
so Kabara is definitely, the thing is, it's on the east, and it's actually a sort of primarily jungle-ish region.
Right.
But it is the whole idea of, this is a region that has largely been left alone and unexplored,
Uh huh.
and that people moved into it during the last war and suddenly discovered there's shards in them that are jungles.
Right.
And so suddenly there's this shard rush, of people moving in and starting mining towns. And so it's very much that idea that it is the frontier, that we don't really know what's going on there. We don't really understand the ways of the indigenous people. And that there are dangers that, and what I will love, and what I love about it is I've run this campaign two separate times. In both times, the player characters immediately just went and desecrated a whole bunch of like, sacred sites without any prompting. Just of course you go there. There's a bunch of jewels. Of course you pry them up.
Right.
And I'm like, yeah, good job. You're definitely playing the part of horrific outsider,
Yeah.
insensitive outsider very well.
Yeah.
But
but again, like Eberron is very much a world with consequence, and that's why I've
exactly.
always enjoyed it.
And that's why I love the fact that the players immediately blundered into the action that was going to have really bad consequences without me having to prompt them or push them in any.
Do you have more books that you are writing, like actually, full novels that you are currently working
Well,
on?
first off, not novels. I would like to, and I don't know, if at some point Wizards is going to decide to do that. Basically, right now you can't publish fiction through the DM's Guild,
Mm-hmm.
and so right now it's not legally possible
Right.
to write more fiction. If that possibility becomes available, both of my main storylines in Eberron, I would love to continue. I have also been actually sketching out the idea for a novel set in Phoenix Dawn Command, which is the role playing game I released a couple years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I may delve into. Beyond that, just in terms of random other things that are going on, my game based on the Adventure Zone is going to come out probably in October,
Fantastic.
and that's a cardboard, game. So it's a collaborative storytelling game, but it's not a full, standard role playing game.
Yeah.
And I'm doing a stream with the Magic Sword or with Magic Sword in a couple of days, set in Eberron. So that'll be part of the Gen Con stream.
Very good.
And I definitely will be doing more Eberron stuff with KB Presents, just, as time allows.
Okay. And this book is coming out when again on DM's Guild very soon.
Yep, yep. Any day now,
Any
like
day now. You
literally
don't have
any
a
day
hard
now.
date, right? Yeah.
We don't have a hard date because it is literally, we've got to get the print proof in. This was the
Yeah.
old one. The moment we do, like as soon as we can look at that print proof and say, yes, it's good,
Right.
then we're flipping the switch. But if it comes tomorrow, we'll do it tomorrow.
Okay.
But we're waiting to see.
And then
Uh,
that again, that book is exploring Eberron. It's coming out on the DM's Guild. It's got a ton of crunch. You've got spells, you've got symbiotes or whatever whatever you've been damaged by that movie.
yes, indeed.
You've got wonderful subclasses, and I'm very excited to play a Transformer Druid. Keith Baker, thank you so much for being on the show. Please come back again, especially if you got another book brewing. It'd
Excellent.
be fun to talk about that. Thank you everyone for watching, and yeah, go check out that book as soon as it comes out. We'll let you know. Bye.
Bye, Bruno.